Hello there. Well, it's been an interesting week, very busy week in World of Warcraft since my last video, and I want to talk about all the stuff that's going on in sort of a WoW weekly recap, try to mix up a bit, not just talk about one topic like I have been doing. And first up is raid testing. Raid testing started in the last week, and already they've tested several bosses, including ones they weren't supposed to test yet, with the first round of testing being buggy, and I'm activating a bunch of bosses that shouldn't be up. So there was that. But raid testing, outside of having the wrong bosses up and server stability, has shown that these bosses are very far along. They are well developed. And bosses themselves, they haven't really been buggy at all. They've been pretty solid when the servers weren't acting up. Or they didn't have the wrong boss up, but anyway. They've already tested several bosses already. They tested the first boss, the second boss, the fourth boss, and the fifth boss, and this one too. Like, they tested 5 bosses already. Now first I want to talk about the raid test schedule. Originally they were going to test every boss this week, all of them on Heroic. And then next week they were going to test them all on Mythic. And a lot of players gave feedback, including myself, that the testing was out of line. Like, they had 4 tests scheduled one day, 3 tests the next week again, more crammed testing. And a lot of players were upset, especially about next week, because guess what else is next week? The Great Push. And a lot of players were like, whoa, Blizzard, what the hell? We have the Great Push to, do time trials for. You can't expect us to do that and raid test at the same time. And Blizzard was like, oh yeah, we totally forgot about that. Here's a new schedule where there's no raid testing next week, conflicting with the Great Push. And on top of that, they no longer were crammed testing 4 bosses in one day. They changed that day to 2 bosses. They still had 3 the next day, but this was originally 4 bosses. And as you can see, there's no testing next week. Well, this week. But you know what I mean. And the week after, they do the last 2 tests on Heroic, and then start Mythic testing. And again, they're not doing cram. They're actually spreading the Mythic testing out across 2 different weeks as well. So, they listen to player feedback, which is very good. The original schedule was like, what are you smoking, Blizzard? Nobody's gonna show up for that shit. You're not paid enough for that. Not paid anything for that. But anyway, raid testing has been going well. As I said, these bosses have already been tested, and every one of them has been stable and for the most part bug-free. Now obviously, you can't take tuning in consideration because they purposely over-tune them on purpose because they want to see the mechanics be tested, not the boss health. So they often take the boss health, like Nexus Princess. Her health was tuned very high. Everyone was hitting her berserk because they just wanted to see her mechanics, which is like beams everywhere. Blaze 2.0. But yeah, raid testing has been interesting so far. Another thing that's been interesting is that up until raid testing, these have been the private auras. Only 3 bosses have private auras to date, and I've been checking every build. Even the build that just went out today added no new private auras, which surprised me considering raid testing. A lot of them would have responded already with a couple more, but they haven't yet. They've been kind of light with private auras. And the bosses that have private auras so far, this one, and well, basically the bosses that were all tested the same day. Those are the ones that have private auras. And none of the other bosses do yet, not even the last boss, which I know they're going to add those later. So why do I think they're holding those back? To see what we do. They want to test these bosses without private auras and see what people come up with. Who cooks up a weak aura? Or what me or bigwigs come up with. As you know, I'm the DVM guy, so. My approach for this, though, is simple. I'm actually being very hands-off. I was actually hands-off last year. I didn't add stuff until other people did. I purposely did hands off. Even when the fights had private auras and had workarounds, I still was hands off. I knew of 3 workarounds that defeated private auras last year, and I didn't implement any of them until Bigwigs did. And it's not like a slight to Bigwigs, because Bigwigs only did it because weak auras did. You know, it's sort of a... You have to do it if someone else does it first. You know, once the weak auras were out there, the cat was out of the bag. Then Bigwigs added it, then I added it, because it was like, if you didn't, then players are just going to switch to something that did. So it's... Oftentimes we know about things, and we don't actually use them until we're backed into a corner to use them, because the cat's out of the bag. And I think this time around, again, it's going to be similar. It's going to be one of those things where I'm probably going to be pretty hands-off, Bigwigs will probably be pretty hands-off, and the weak auras are going to be like, you know, the numbers GIF, you know, going crazy with computational solutions, and it's going to be like, oh shit, here we go again. And then I got to edit, and Bigwigs has to edit, and Blizzard's going to be like, private, private, private. And I think that's how it's going to happen. I kind of wish Blizzard would just make things private to start with and just save us that time waste. But, you know, Blizzard's never been very proactive. They're pretty reactive on this stuff. So I suspect, yeah, it's going to play out like that. Just watch and see. But that's pretty much a waiting game. So what else is going on besides raid testing? Well, in this PTR build, we had an interesting data mine. We might already have an idea of what the next raid is after the one that we're raid testing now. Ethereal raid. Now, this could just be a red herring from Blizzard. This could be like them, you know, putting stuff into the data and giving it like a temp name just to screw with data miners. Because they have the ability to encrypt stuff, and they didn't encrypt this. And I don't think they'd make a screw up this big so readily, so it's like 50-50, it's a red herring, and 50-50 is that they just don't care if you know it's a ethereal raid, they're just using it for hype. You know, they want you to get hyped up about it, because people have been wanting that for a while, you know. People love them. So that'll be interesting. Now, what else is going on in beta land? PTR testing. If you're not in beta, they're still doing PTR. And they're testing the Warband conversion. That's not even active on beta yet. And what this is they're testing your alts being copied to the PTR and seeing if they convert properly to a Warband without any errors, you know. It's basically a stress test to make sure that when the pre-patch goes live, all hell doesn't break loose. You know, they actually emphasized copy as many characters as possible. We want you to copy every alt you have to the PTR and log into all of them because we want our tech to test our tech to see if it merges together. That's what Blizzard said. So, if you want to help with this, you should. Copy everything you can to the PTR, log in, and make sure your stuff converts. And if it doesn't, report, report, report. You know, when this goes live, I'm sure the players and Blizzard both want it to go smoothly. So what else is going on beta? Well, there's been a lot of dungeon testing on beta. We've already been testing Mythic Plus, which, as you know, is, well, I can show you in DBM. This dungeon pool. You know, Stone Vault, Dawnbreaker, City of Echoes, City of Threads, Mist has returned, Necrotic Wake has returned, Siege of Borealis has returned, and Grim Batol has returned. Now, as you've already seen, they've pretty much... Grim Batol, they reworked all the bosses. They all have new mechanics. They removed several trash mechanics, but added some new mechanics as well, so it's going to feel like a fresh experience. Siege of Borealis is actually mostly the same, with a couple tweaks. It's no longer Alliance and Horde version. Both factions are going to play the same version, so there's no discrepancies anymore. And they removed the annoying dogs in front of the first boss. And then Necrotic Wake, that's been mostly the same. And Mist has been mostly the same, with just tweaks here and there to, you know, timers and trash abilities. And then obviously the 4 new dungeons, obviously they're not the same because they're new. But One thing that's been clear about the dungeons, though, is they've been hard. People are struggling to do even a 3. And that's with their tier set and everything. Now, granted, this could be a scaling issue. It could be that they're just scaling the eye level too low, like too conservatively, and leaving players a little underpowered for the dungeon content. And they're struggling. Even Mythic Zeros, I did some Mythic Zeros, and while they were doable, they weren't too hard or anything, they felt high for a Mythic Zero, and that's taken into account that they're equivalent to what the old 10s were. Like, these were experienced players I was grouped with, and a few things were unforgivable, and one of the things that stood out was interrupts. As it stands now in Mythic Plus, almost none of the spells have this spell flag. Now, what does this spell flag mean? Trigger cooldown and cast start. That means that as soon as the cast starts casting, even if you interrupt it with a stun, or a knockback, or daze, or anything other than an interrupt, it still went on cooldown and wasn't recast immediately. That's not what's happening on Mythic Plus right now. In beta, most of the spells do not have the spell flag like they do on live, which means if you use a shockwave, as soon as that stun ends, that spell is immediately going into recast. It is not on cooldown until either it's interrupted or the cast finishes. And that leaves you in a situation to where when you have a pack of mobs, or 2 groups of mobs you pull together and there's like 7 spells to interrupt, you literally need 7 hard interrupts to control those spells. You can't just pop Shockwave and put everything on cooldown like you can on both Mythic Plus and Live. Now, whether this is a bug or an intended change is unknown. Some of us have been reporting the feedback because right now it does feel a bit overwhelming. The number of spells that you have to control with hard interrupts is too high. Like, you have to pull smaller, in a way, if your group is not giga-stacked with interrupts. And that's one thing that's making Mythic Plus feel harder than normal. Now, another thing that's been going on is delve testing. Delves is the new solo player content, which is all of these right here. Delves has been getting a lot of feedback on the forums too. Initially, there have been some classes that have said it's too easy, they steamroll through it. These are tankier classes, or classes that have a lot of CC and control. Like warriors with Shockwave, Stormbolt, Shield Charge. Multiple CCs that could stop cast, stun mobs, control mobs, slow mobs, etc. And just classes with more defensive, like tanks and stuff, doing much better than saying, some squishy mage who has far less control, and if something looks at him funny, they fall over. So, Blizzard's been doing some tuning passes. I did the delves earlier today, and I felt like the mobs were hitting a lot weaker, and the spells were hitting for a lot weaker. Like, spells that felt dangerous before don't feel nearly as dangerous as they did before on the same difficulty delve I was doing, last week or the week before. But there was another key change I noticed. I don't know if it happened this week or last week, because I'll admit last week I was mostly focusing on Mythic Plus and not on delves. So this could have been a last week change. But it's, Blizzard did the opposite of this. Before, many of the delves did have this flag, which meant that if you did hard stun or did knockback, the spell still went on cooldown, because they did have the flag that said, trigger cooldown on cast start. This flag was removed from many delve abilities recently, which means now hard CCs no longer trigger the cooldown. Now, again, only the cast finishing or hard interrupt are putting it on cooldown. And I think this is intentional based on what I've been reading in the thread, because if you think about it, how is it fair that a Shadow Priest has 1 interrupt, but a Warrior has 5, because he has Stormbolt, Shockwave, and a whole bunch of other shit he could use to stop that spell? So the line of thinking was, if this is supposed to be designed for 1 player to 5 players, there needs to be equality between the Shadow Priest and the Warrior and the Rogue and the Mage. There had to be some parity that goes, this class that has a ton of knocks and stuns should not be an advantage over this class that doesn't. So I suspect they removed this flag on purpose to reduce the power of hard CCs in delves, and that's also why they reduced the power of spells if you didn't interrupt them. Like, there were spells before that if I didn't interrupt them, even as a tank, it would take a chunk off my health. Now, as a tank, my health barely moves. But the number of interrupts I have for that spell is now 1. When before, I had a shit ton of abilities that could stop that spell. So I think they're going in a direction to where delves do feel fair when you don't have a full group. You know, you not necessarily want to stack the group with 5 people just so you can interrupt spells or CC just because you play a class that doesn't have that. You might want to play solo. And I think the delve designers know this, and they're actually making this change deliberately in delves, which is the opposite of what it should be in Mythic Plus. I think Mythic Plus, the spells should absolutely have this spell flag, because if they don't, then Mythic Plus is a bit overtuned right now, you know, because those spells do not hit softly, and there are a lot of spells. So it's also not designed for 1 player. You're always going to have 5 players. And it's been pretty standard in general in Mythic Plus that they intentionally add the spell flag so that you have those options to CC and control mobs in a better way. So that's what's going on with the War Within and PTR. So what's going on with Live? Well, Live, Remix is still going pretty strong. And Season 4? Well, Season 4 is still Season 4, you know. It's pretty boring, which I discussed in another video that you could find down there in the links if you want to talk about why I think Season 4 is not doing well. But Remix, what's going on with Remix? They finally added what we've been saying they should add. A buff to Bronze Acquisition and Threads. This Threads catch-up is really good. It's actually a situation where if you do daily quests like this, looking for more, and get this spool gives you, like, with this buff, if you just do the daily quest and nothing else, you're still getting like 6, 7, 8,000 threads per day, just doing the bare minimum, doing the daily quests or the daily queues. You can't see it because I already did it today. No, I was doing these because each one gives a spool. The threads still only give like 12 stats or 24 stamina, but the spools, they get 500 stat or 1,000 stamina, like per spool. It's crazy. So it's like, you do that, and your cloak catches up pretty quickly. But Remix is still missing one fatal thing though, and that's still, there is no catch up for gear, which I still think is a mistake. Now the bronze thing is helping. It is. But there's still a situation where if you go into Group Finder, let's see here. They're requiring 415, 400 and up. Some of these aren't requiring it, so I guess that's not too bad right now. They're requiring 450. They're requiring 476, and that's for just that instance. That's ridiculous. 430. But even though they don't, some of them don't have a requirement on there, but I guarantee you if you queue with a character that's fresh, you'll be waiting in that queue and not getting an invite. Because people don't want to carry you. They want to just bring pumpers and get a fast clear to get bronze and buy all this mog. And this is why I still think, you can watch my other video for details, but I'm just going to basically say it real quick. This needs catch up. It doesn't need to be like reduce the cost for all eye levels, but just be like, at this point it should be like, if your eye level is under 400 or maybe even 420, you know, give a nice stoner number in there, then the cost to upgrade up to 420 should be cheap. Let players who are jumping into this now catch up. That's what Remix needs. And that's about it for live. And that's about it for the WoW Weekly summary of what's gone on in the last week. As I said, the next week, you know, given the raid testing schedule, there's no raid testing. Mythic Plus has been turned off until next weekend, probably. They'll probably turn it back on, they usually do. So pretty much the only thing to test right now is the Warband Migration on PTR or Delves on beta. I think you can do Mythic 0 still. I think the Dungeon Teleporter is still here, so I think you can still do, like... Yeah, you can still go into any of these dungeons on a Mythic 0 or Heroic. I might be wrong about the Mythic 0. Let me confirm that before I actually sell you bullshit. See, Dungeon difficulty, Mythic. Teleport me to Mists. Okay, Mythic 0 is still open. So there you go. You can't test Mythic Plus, but you can still see all the new dungeon mechanics and changes all week doing Mythic Zeros. So that's probably worth doing if you still want to test your WeakRs or your UI and see the mechanic changes and experiment with routes and stuff, because you can still test this out on Mythic 0, which is effectively a Mythic 10 of old, so it's still productive value testing. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll try to do kind of status updates on WoW weekly like this, and I will try to do other videos too. I'm sorry I've been scarce on the videos lately, but it's pretty much the raid testing that made me go MIA for a week, because I still have to work on DBM and Mythic Plus and Delves. All of these require testing. I'm working on mods, so my YouTubing is pretty sporadic during these test seasons, but I promise that, like, once we get closer to War Within and the mods are more polished and in a ready state, I'll be uploading more often and probably doing some other game uploads again too. There's the self-promotion engagement thing for the video. Now, thank you, and see you in the next one.